Bhagavad Gita, by which Arjuna was illumined by Lord Krishna himself, and which was composed of 18 chapters within the Mahabharata by the ancient sage Vyasa. O Divine Mother, destroyer of rebirth, who showers the nectar of oneness among us, O Bhagavad Gita, my affectionate mother, on thee I meditate. All the Upanishads are the cows, the milker is the cowherd boy, Krishna, Arjuna is the calf, people of purified intellect are the drinkers, and the milk is the supreme nectar of Gita. My salutations to the Lord, who is the source of supreme bliss, whose grace makes the mute eloquent and the crippled cross mountains. Thank you. Indeed. Indeed. That's a big mantra to make you feel. That one's also in the Gita, the discussion of it. So we just completed, we're in 4th chapter. And we had just completed yesterday this discussion of this shloka that we chant all the time. We want to chant together again. Om Brahmarpanam Brahmavir Brahmagano Brahmanutam Brahmdevatena Gantavyam Brahma Karma Samadhinam. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. So we can pick up here with that translation and come back to the bhava, to that place. So what we take to be an individual, what we take to be myself, an individual, is really a conglomeration of universal principles. There's nothing individual here. Everything we're dealing with is universal. It's very interesting when we look, and we have to look at some point, because there is no individual. The digestive system, if you look at what we call I, if we start at the body, we see the hands and feet and such, which are constructed of the 5 elements, which are universal. We see the life force coursing through, which is not mine, it's prana, it's universal. It's the same life force that powers and underlies everything here. There's no individual aspect of it. It can't be separated, in fact. When we look at the intelligence or the mental principle, we see, well, I have my thoughts, but that in which this thought is universal. The mind principle itself, the mind is universal. Even the plants, we used to think that it was in the brain. In science, we thought that the brain was required for thought, but we've discovered that the plants think. Right? And that's rediscovered time after time after time. That was ancient knowledge. No doubt the natives know that the plants think, because they understand the different qualities of the plants as well. So, and then the breath. This breath is breathed through this body. We don't have anything to do with it, for God's sakes. You can consciously breathe. What? Oh, yeah. Thank you. Thank you. But it also happens without our involvement. And the breath itself is universal. And the digestive system. So we say, I eat. Okay, fine. You put food, which is universal, into this mouth, which is universal. And then it goes, how is the food distributed? Do you process the food? Do you do that? Do you distribute it through the blood system? So also universal. And so God is a name for that which is universal, that which is the totality, that which is the all. Right? These universal principles They came from somewhere. They're borrowed by every single being. And every single human, and we could say beyond that as well, also suffers from this notion that I'm doing something, but in fact I'm not doing anything. So we came to this shloka, and then the question is, okay, but I am suffering. Okay, but I am suffering. So how do I end the suffering? And that's really the discussion of the Bhagavad Gita. There are these two apparent selves within us. So this shloka that we chant with every meal translates to the offering itself is Brahman. The offering itself, that which is being offered in the meal, is a form of God. Universal. The oblation, the ghee, that which the meal is prepared, is Brahman. And it's God. We can say Krishna as well. Which is offered by who? Brahman. Into the fire of Brahman. The one who sees nothing but Brahman in all that he or she does certainly realizes Brahman. So that speaks to the individual. The one who sees what's really up here realizes the truth and becomes free of the suffering. I'm not this body. I'm not even these thoughts. So we continue in the spirit of yajna, or sacrifice, or the way to make sacred, or the way to realize. Mother is preparing. Tomorrow evening starts Navaratri, the 9-night celebration of Mother. So Mother is making the presence known. So he speaks of sacrifices and how we might sacrifice. He says some yogis make sacrifices, and there's a series here on sacrifice and yajna. Some yogis make sacrifices to the devas, the gods and the angels, while others offer their very selves as a sacrifice to Brahman, the absolute God. We've taken some time with this concept, so he's comparing and contrasting. We could consider ourselves all to be yogis, everyone in the world in a way, because we're all trying to get happiness. The only thing about the one that we would call a yogi is there might be an intentional motive to that. And maybe we come to the point where we're trying to give happiness instead of getting it, which would actually be an elevated place. Swami Shivananda says, in fact, there's no atheist in the world because everybody wants happiness, and happiness is God. So everybody actually wants the same thing. We just imagine that what we want is in different places. And that's the nature of the psyche, the diversity within the psyches. So, and in order to get the thing, we sacrifice. We give something to get something. And of course, we're in the marketplace here, so everybody imagines that I have to give something in order to have happiness. Right? So if we place the happiness in our potential partner, then we have to do something in order to please the partner. It's like squeezing the udder of the cow, you know. So I have to give you a diamond ring and then you make me happy. Right? I have to make meals for you and then you make me happy. Like that. So everybody's worshiping something, but with the same goal of happiness. And then we have this concept of this whole world. It's like a factory. We can imagine it to be a factory churning out the things that we imagine to give us happiness. But this whole world is churning out something. It's constantly churning out something. So like any factory, it has supervisors. and factory floor managers and all of this. And we call these the devas, the gods, the limited, more limited. It's a way to deal with the process, as opposed to the absolute, which would be the CEO, the one in charge of the whole show, which would be Brahman, or Vishnu, or Krishna. Oh. So some yogis make sacrifices to interim. Right? I want money. I want power. So they're factory floor managers for that. I mean, there are, because if you work in a company, your boss has the keys to the money. So I lived this dream, right? So I would worship him. What? He's like the udder that if I squeeze, I get the money. So I have to squeeze him lovingly, and I get more money. Or the customers, I have to squeeze the udder with the customers to make them happy. In order, I want money, give me some money. So it's a process of worship, or whatever it is you want. So we sacrifice. What are we sacrificing? Well, we give prana. We give. It's not ours to give, really, but still. We give the energy, we give the life, we give the days, we give the focus, the attention, right? So that's our offering. Does that make sense? That's our offering. So we're all offering something in order to get something. But then he says, while others offer their very selves as a sacrifice, even selflessly, even say, dear Lord, you have all of it, I want nothing. Right? That would be said to be the highest sacrifice. That in that sacrificial fire, without asking, but offering all, one would receive all, without asking. But that would actually be said to be the highest, this union. So we continue on the theme, and he gives a little detail. He says, as an offering, some restrain their senses, such as hearing, seeing, tasting, while others sacrifice sense objects, such as sounds, etc., that otherwise would be enjoyed by the senses. Now, why would we do that? We had a little discussion last night. If what we're seeking is really inside, and it's universal, then why am I not seeing it, smelling it, tasting it, touching it? Actually, we just had Sloka 24, so I am, but I don't know that I am. Does that make any sense? So I am, but I don't know that I am. So if I understand that the issue is that I am, but I don't know that I am, then I would ask, how do I fix that? And that's what Lord is dealing with here. How do I fix it? So, well, there's something veiling, there's something blocking. So I'm putting something above, or I'm imagining some superposition over what's really here. So I look at Sean, and if I see Sean as an individual, separate person, and I'm not able to see God where Sean is sitting, and of course God is there because this is all just the universal principle of expression, then I would sacrifice the way I'm seeing. I would withdraw that way of seeing. I might close the eyes as a practice in order to see more clearly. I might close the ears because what I'm wanting to see actually isn't directly perceived by the eyes, the ears, etc. They have to be trained in order to really see what's here. So then that would be a way of sacrificing. There's actually that withdrawal from the sense objects, which seem to have covered over
what we're wanting to be able to see, or to taste, or to touch, or even a withdrawal from the senses. So some restrain their senses. It's a practice of yoga. It's called? No. Sorry? Pratyahara. Oh. We'll start on Monday. Hari will start a Raja Yoga workshop on Monday. So we've been discussing. So it's called Pratyahara, right? Sense withdrawal. And for what purpose is it? In order to see or taste or touch or hear what's deeper than the surface objects, right? Motivated by wisdom, still others offer their senses and vital energy, prana, as a sacrifice in the form of self-restraint. So we find ourselves being drawn to engage in the sense objects and the prana flowing towards them. And if we find through wisdom that practice, that process is continually covering up what's here for us, then we could restrain, and that's also a sacrifice. In one way, it's a giving up, but sacrifice doesn't actually mean giving up. Sacrifice means converting. I remember it was at the CSL, YCSL, a couple of years ago. I was stupid me. I had the idea that I knew what the word sacrifice meant. I would have defined it as a giving up of something. And we were in a Upanishad workshop. We were on the Tattva Upanishad with a small group sitting in the main chapel there. And somebody asked, what does the word sacrifice mean? And I sat back and said something not very prescient. And he said, actually, the word comes from the Greek, sacre fiche. Sacre means sacred, fiche means to make. So I said it means to make divine, or to make holy, or to make sacred. So it's this alchemical process where sacrifice means to make from what apparently is mundane, to make it sacred. It brings new meaning to the term, and we relate to it that way. So in that case, if I have a mundane life, then I would give my life for what purpose? To make it sacred, to make it holy, like this. So motivated by wisdom, still others offer their senses and vital energy, the prana, as a sacrifice in the form of self-restraint. Some offer their wealth as a sacrifice, or their suffering, or the fruits of their yoga practices. Others who tend towards austerity and extreme vows offer the fruits and the knowledge of sacred study as their sacrifice. Among those primarily interested in the control of the life force, so that's the Raja Yoga, right? Because the idea with Raja Yoga is to control the thoughts. And controlling the thoughts is controlling the life force. It's the same thing. So among those primarily interested in controlling the life force by restraining the flow of the breathing, pranayama, that's what pranayama is. Some offer the out-breath as a sacrifice to the in-breath, and the in-breath to the out-breath. Sometimes I'll bring that up in meditation as we're preparing for meditation. I don't know if you noticed. Sometimes we'll bring that up because who is breathing these breaths? So if you see it as a yogi practitioner, if you see it, then you have the ability to actually offer the breath to the breath. You're not offering to the breath, you're offering to the Lord, who is the breath. So it's when we have an issue, And the issue is in our seeing or the way we're interacting. That we're just not seeing properly. We're not understanding properly. And in this case, let's say for a moment that what we're seeking is actually right here, and we're not apprehending it properly. Then how to do? If we know that it's here, but in the common intercourse, in the common conduct of our lives, we're not aware of it, what does that mean? It means consciously, when I reflect and consider, and I read a scripture and I relate to my experience, I can see it's here. But subconsciously, remember we were talking last night, 98% of what we think is action is really reaction. Right? So, and that means it's unconscious or subconscious action. Yes? So we take it to be life, but it's really just a reactive state. It's really an unconscious living. It's a living death. Because we're not really aware, we're not really awake, we're not really choosing. It's being, all of our past actions are choosing our current actions in that case. So what we see our situation then is that, well, when I really contemplate it and consider it, I see that, my dear Lord, you're right here, right now. But then I live my life as if you're not. And so when we catch that, then life becomes about seeing you, hearing you, touching you in these moments, which means bringing the conscious mind into the moment and actually slowing down a little bit enough with a strong intention and a strong resolve to see you right here, right now. Where I have been doing something unconsciously to actually be fully aware and awake of it, and to be fully aware of what's happening. So in the Isha Upanishad, the reading last night talked about study of the Isha Upanishad, so that everyone should at least read the Isha Upanishad. So the first shloka, first sutra of the Isha Upanishad says all of this is to be covered over by the Lord, which is actually a practice. If we've discovered that the universal is all that's here, the universal, and that we're taking there to be some limitation where the limitation doesn't actually exist, then what's the practice for that? The practice is to see the universal, to cover over what seems to be limited with the universal. So many ways to see it, so many ways to do it. You can bring a picture of however you picture God into the object, and you can superimpose it, you can see it. You can contemplate on the universality of the hand or the instruments or all of this. All of these are different ways to cover over the objects with the absolute. Here, breath is one, for example. To consciously relate to the breath is not my breathing, right? But the Lord breathing through this instrument. You have the ability to relate to it that way for a moment. And then if you can do it for one moment, can you do it the next moment too? So it's actually a conscious way of divinizing, bringing divinity into what we consider to be mundane. It's really the sacrifice. It's really bringing the reality here in this moment, isn't it? And what I'm sacrificing is my old way of seeing, my old way of doing. I'm sacrificing the sleeping state to the waking state. Right? So it's a practice. And this is being discussed. So others who restrict their diets offer the additional vitality of such austerity as their sacrifice. All these yogis are purified by yajna. There's a little commentary here on this one that might be helpful. So there are two, I only read one of these shlokas, 30 and 31. Others who regulate their diet offer life breaths in life breaths. All these are knowers of sacrifice, whose sins are destroyed by sacrifice. Again, sin doesn't have the meaning we attribute to it. Sin just means apart from truth or apart from God. Those who eat the remnants of the sacrifice, which are like nectar, go to the eternal Brahman. This world is not for the man who does not perform sacrifice. How can they have the other, O Arjuna? We'll take a little time with that tomorrow morning. But here's the commentary. He says, lastly, there are those who are abstemious in their diet. That's a weird word, I suppose. So, abstemious. So, who abstain, who are abstentious, who eat little, abstain, don't follow the senses and the urges, but eat only intentionally just enough. That's the concept. And then he continues. They eat merely to keep the body and soul together. So Swami Satchidananda would be a very, very good example of that. Swami Satchidananda is up here. So no one here really is that aware of his story. Because I had lived with Swami Ramasrup, I became very aware of his story. But he only had a little bit of soul every day. It was just enough. And he looked like a rail, right? But the vitality was absolutely there. He only ate in order to keep the soul in the body, to sustain the body just enough for the soul to function through the body, like that. So kept them together. If he would have eaten any less, the soul would have left the body. So, and people would say he must have suffered and all that, but if you were with him and saw his smile, the way he glows, you'd say, no, he's not missing anything. And I'm not missing anything being in his presence. They merely eat to keep body and soul together. When the life force in them clamors for more, they turn it upon itself, offering, as it were, the life force itself as the oblation to it. It's a hard concept, but maybe there's some way we can relate. The spirit of sacrifice destroys sin. Again, sin doesn't have the what we think. It's not, Catholic tradition and all that. This is what we're dealing with, by the way, in society today. The common notions that we have about what things mean are absolutely false. They're made up stuff that we convince each other. If we could take a little time and look at root words, where the words came from and what the meaning of the root was, etc., we can get much closer to it. Sanskrit's amazing because Sanskrit actually holds the meaning of it. It's a container. But in the conversational languages like English, most everything we say, we don't understand what we're saying, what we're hearing. The word sin is one of those. It doesn't mean that somebody's bad. It means that they're apart from the truth. So when I act sinfully, it just means I act in a way that has separated me from my reality, from love. Right? So it's possible to act in ways that separates us from love, right? Okay, so that action would be said to be sinful. And it's not, you don't judge people on that. We just use that to discern within ourselves, right? And to say, oh my gosh, I lost the love. This anger then would be said to be sinful because I lost the love when I lost myself to anger. So maybe it's a new or different way to look at a concept that people will tend to beat us up with. It's not like that. It just means I came apart. Really, I came apart. I disintegrated. I disintegrated. Oh. And of course, when I've disintegrated, there's no peace. I'm in dis-ease. Another word. I lost the ease, so disease. Become diseased. So the spirit of sacrifice destroys that sin. The spirit of sacrifice destroys that process by which we keep separating ourselves from love. When I live my life as an offering, then that process whereby I keep separating myself from love breaks down. It gets destroyed. And after a while, I live in love. Because I live to give instead of to get. Right? All these practices are neither good nor bad in themselves. For example, austerity, tapas, or fire can either lead to the destruction of the sinful nature or increase one's vanity, depending upon the inner spirit. The spirit of yajna, the spirit of sacrifice, detaches the self from the activity itself, thus allowing the latter to wipe the mirror clean, so that in it the ever-pure self is instantly reflected in all its glory. Failure to understand and adopt this symbolism will often result in our wiping the mirror with the face, thus transferring the evil tendency from the mirror, the body and mind, to the skin of the face, the ego. The spirit of sacrifice also warns us not to expect anything in return. Only the ashes of purity or sattva will remain after the sacrifice. The sacred ashes are so dear to Lord Shiva, who naturally bestows upon us all that is good. So we'll come back in the morning, of course, from here. Okay, good discussion. Any questions, comments on this one? Oh dear.
The word sing brings back feelings for me.
The what?
The word sing.
Yeah, I understand.
And I'm wondering,
But the word doesn't bring it.
Right, it's my
Because the word is just the word.
But that's my question is, how can I define it in a way that is not portrayed?
We just gave a pretty good definition.
Okay.
That which separates you from love.
Mm-hmm.
Can you work with that?
Yes.
Okay. And you don't use it against anyone else, and you don't use it against yourself either.
Mm-hmm.
But when you hear it, you can relate to it this way.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And then it'll shift and change that inner reaction in some time.
I heard it said that we should learn to separate the distance between who we are and who we ought to be. And Chap.4 once said that in every moment you can be eternal in your Satchidananda, in your consciousness with the divine, that eradicates all of this drudgery and calamity of mental speculation.
And we call that samadhi.
Samadhi.
Yes.
I find that we're so blessed in yoga to have that communion, that connection, whereas it seems to be absent in certain paths.
Well, and we could also say it's absent in yoga. It has to do with the earnestness of the individual. Because the teaching's here, but just like this, the teaching can also be used as a weapon to beat someone else up with. So, just like as the discussion here, any action, the action itself doesn't do something. It's the inner bhava associated with the action that's binding us or freeing us.
I was going to say that your definition of sin is remarkably similar to, if I recall correctly, the Gnostic Christians who say it's missing the mark.
Missing the mark, yeah, it's good.
Because I think the word originally came from an archery term, sin, missing the mark.
Very good, very good. Yeah, beautiful. Beautiful. Oh. There you go. And the mark is happiness, that source of happiness, you could say like that, right? That's what we want. So we miss the mark. Oh. Okay, we'll close. Anything else to share?
I had a memory come of when we were studying I Am That
Yes.
and Sri Nisargadatta, because I try and, after he said this, I started noticing that it's true. Like if I'm sacrificing my time and my day and what I'm thinking, I'll notice like certain days I do this, seeking like pleasure, even if it's like
Yes.
quote unquote spiritual pleasure now.
Yes.
Like these, fun deities and all these different practices and such. I'll notice there's this sort of anxiety and a dullness.
Yes.
And my heart gets covered over and I feel like an emptiness inside of myself. Whereas if it's like I'm focused on others, it's like that gets opened up in a way.
Very good. Yeah, it's very practical, what you should.
But it takes resolve because my mind will keep going back to that if I don't watch it.
It takes firm resolve, and it also takes the willingness to discern and discriminate between things. Introspection. We've got to have the real sincere interest in introspecting. Okay, we'll close page 174, the final prayers, and two. Om Trayambakam Yajamahe Sugandhim Pushtivardhanam Orvairukmeva Bandhanam Mritor Mukshyaman Mritat Om Trayambakam Yajamahe Sugandhim Pushtivardhanam Orvairukmeva Bandhanam Mritor Mukshyaman Mritat Om Trayambakam Yajamahe Sugandhim Pushtivardhanam Orvairukmeva Bandhanam Mritor Mukshyaman Mritat Om Sarvesham Swastir Bhavatu Sarvesham Shantir Bhavatu Sarvesham Purnam Bhavatu Sarvesham Mangalam Bhavatu Sarve Bhavantu Sukhina Sarve Shantu Niramaya Sarve Bhadrani Pashyanto Makashitu Bhave Asato Ma Satgamaya Tamaso Ma Jyotir Gamaya Mrityor Ma Mritangamaya Om Purnamida Purnamidam Purnamudachyate Purnasya Purnamadaya Purnameva Vasishate Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Universal prayer. O adorable Lord, in mercy and love, salutations and prostrations unto Thee. Thou art omnipresent, omnipotent, and omniscient. Thou art Satchidananda. Thou art existence, knowledge, and bliss absolute. Thou art the indweller of all beings. Grant us an understanding heart, equal vision, balanced mind, faith, devotion, and wisdom. Grant us inner spiritual strength to resist temptation and to control the mind. Free us from egoism, lust, anger, greed, hatred, and jealousy. Fill our hearts with divine virtues. Let us behold Thee in all these names and forms. Let us serve Thee in all these names and forms. Let us ever remember Thee. Let us ever sing Thy glories. Let Thy name be ever on our lips. Let us abide in Thee forever and ever. Humble Secretary Shivananda Maharaj Ki. And salutations to all the saints and sages of all traditions.